Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the April Roundtable. We have a great speaker today, Donna Gregorio. But before we begin that, I just wanted to remind people to continue to look at the PMI website for upcoming webinars and presentations, especially the Mass Bay Chapter. We have a lot of good activities arising. Some you have to pay, some are free, but it's a great way to learn more about project management, to network, and just learn new skills. For today, again, we have a great speaker with Donna, who, as we were just talking about a few minutes ago, she has upcoming speaking engagements, but she will be speaking today. And Donna is a veteran corporate IT project manager. She is a published author and college graduate school instructor. She is the department head of the IT project management office at the MITRE or MITRE Corporation, and guides her teams through a high stress and fast-paced environment. Her book, The Successful Project Manager, tells firsthand stories of complex projects, highlights what went wrong, and describes how to apply game-changing tools to address challenges. She is a board member of the PMI Mass Bay Chapter, so it's great to have her as a leadership role here at this roundtable. And she holds the position of VP of Professional Development, providing members of the PM best practices through scheduled events. With that, I will pass it off to Donna. Take it away. Thank you.
All right, John, thanks for that great introduction. Really appreciate it. So thank you, everyone, for deciding to spend your lunch hour with me today. As John said, I have some upcoming events planned, and the scorecard that is being discussed in this presentation is part of a future presentation I have. So any feedback you have on the scorecard in particular, I'm interested in. So I put this material together as part of things that are happening at MITRE, specifically around project management. And thanks, a special shout out to some of the folks that are on the call today that are my MITRE colleagues, past and present. So thanks for joining. We've been talking about doing some sort of lightweight training of project management to folks who are not project managers. We tend to work with a lot of very technical people, and they don't know anything about running a project. Yet many times they're thrust into that position because we don't have enough project managers to support every activity. So we've talked about doing some sort of training, and this is kind of the basis for that. So as you're going through this, thinking about your own organization and how you might apply this to your work, and maybe use it for training in your area. I spend a lot of time getting thrown into projects that are already in flight, and have to go through and find all the documentation and artifacts that have been put together. In some cases, they have not been put together, and I have to do them myself. So the question is, what are your key artifacts that you kind of, you have to have them? They're required. You absolutely need them on every project that you work on that has any chance of being successful. And so this is this playbook that I'm trying to share with you here today. The playbook really is your recipe, if you will, for hoping for the best and getting the best out of your project. And the Project Management Institute recommends a set of phases, project phases. So we'll be looking at these phases. But what is that minimum viable product that helps guide you through success? And then what is a scorecard that might gauge your specific effectiveness and the effectiveness of your organization and maturity in project management? So those are kind of the two things. We'll be looking at the minimum viable product, and then where are you good, or where do you have gaps in some of these areas, and where might you need to enhance some of what you're doing already. And so I'm providing you here today with some guidance in that area, templates for each of these artifacts that we'll be talking about, and then that scorecard to help you with your gauging your effectiveness. So those three outputs, hopefully, for today, and excited to get into it. So I love this picture. This is actually a photograph of a set of hats that is on the wall of a colleague of mine. And these hats indicate the many, many hats that project managers have to wear. And I'm sure you recognize yourself in many of these hats. I tend to wear the fireman's hat an awful lot lately, especially. But we'll try to go through the different phases of the project and where you can shine, hopefully, in some of these areas. So there's lots of documentation about project management maturity, and there are consultants that will come in and assess your organization and help you get better at project management. And I think that there is a level of maturity that starts at the individual level. So how mature are you as a project manager? And then as you go through the levels, you see it becomes more of a standard across your group, perhaps, or group across the highest priority projects that you have in your organization. And then as you continue along in the maturity levels, it becomes more and more institutionalized across the organization. And that, of course, comes from your leadership, who says we need to standardize. And sometimes your leadership cares about that, and sometimes they don't. They've got other priorities that they're focused on. But, you know, nonetheless, it is always a wise thing to first of all, have some sort of a process that's tied to these templates. So you're not just spitting out artifacts. You have a process in place for creating these, reviewing them with your team, partnering with your team. And those are kind of the key things that we want to talk about. You're becoming a trusted advisor on these projects. And so there's a lot of respect that you have as their leader in these different areas, and you become a critical team member and an irreplaceable team member. We'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that as we go through this. But this is really your overview here of what we're going to cover today. So we'll start out in the initiation phase. We'll move into planning and execution. We'll talk about performance and then project close. And these don't necessarily align exactly with what the PMI has, but and of course don't necessarily align with every single project we work on. But in general, these are the things, these are the artifacts that should exist for most of the projects that you work on. And of course, the initiation phase is, in my opinion, the most important phase for a project manager. But as I said, I often get dropped into the middle of these things, and they're way into the execution, way past the initiation phase, and they don't even have a schedule. They might have a budget, but they don't have a schedule, or they didn't write a project charter, and I end up writing those kinds of things myself. So anyway, let's get into it and see how successful we can be. Here is my very basic and straightforward scorecard. And so let me describe what I intend this to be for you as an audience member. So what I'm thinking is that in each of these phases, we have a set of elements or artifacts that we anticipate that we would be writing. In which of these areas do you think you have a strength? And in which of these areas do you think you have a weakness? I could tell you for myself that I'm pretty good at writing project charters and schedules, and a little bit weaker in budgets. But I'm really good at status reports. I've had to do a lot of that. So that's something I'm pretty strong at. And I'm probably weak in lessons learned. We don't tend to do that many of those activities in my organization. So I'd say I'm weaker in that area. So I could go through each of these elements and give you a score 1 to 5 of how good I am in those areas. And then across the levels, how well is your organization? How standard are these things across the org, and are they institutionalized? So that's the intent of this scorecard. And I would encourage you, as we go through these things, to give yourself a score for each one of the artifacts that we look at. Give yourself a score, and then give your organization a score. And again, 1 to 5 for each one. And then total them up at the end, and I'd be curious to hear where you think some of your weaknesses are and where some of your strengths are. And, you know, we like to play to our strengths. That's what I always say anyways. I like to make my strengths even stronger. But it might not be a bad idea to also focus in some of your weak areas as well. So that's the idea. And the next slide is an example. So from the organization standpoint anyway, where would you rank your organization? And then where would you rank yourself as well? Okay, so let's get into the initiation phase. We're looking at a project charter, we're looking at a schedule, and we're looking at a budget. Those are the three elements that I would say are pretty critical in this phase. There are other pieces as well, but without these three, you're not really getting very far. If you're kicking off a project and you're responsible as the project manager, what are the other things you're doing at this point in time in terms of process, in terms of establishing yourself as a leader? Certainly establishing trust amongst the team. You need to identify who the team is. That's certainly part of the project charter. You need to demonstrate confidence. That meeting cadence, how often you plan to meet with the team and the assorted folks that are involved, stakeholders. What are your collaboration spaces? Are you using Teams? Are you using SharePoint? And defining those outcomes and the value. That seems to be a big deal for us these days. Defining outcomes and the value that you're bringing to the organization, to your users, to the organization that you're working for. I do work in IT, by the way. Most of these examples that you'll see today are IT related examples. But for those of you in the audience who are maybe in construction, or you're in the medical field, or you're in finance, or you're in other areas, but you're still running projects, many of these things still certainly apply. So I hope you feel that this work that I'm presenting here still does apply. So let's get into it. The first one is a project charter. So we have a standard template in our organization that is a project charter. And what kind of things are included in that project charter? Well, certainly, what is the purpose of the project? What are the goals, the value proposition? Who are the customers? What's in scope? It's my favorite topic is what's in scope and what's out of scope. The more detailed you can be there, the better. What are your assumptions? What are your success criteria? What are your major milestones at a very high level? And then who's your team? Who's your collaborators? Who are your stakeholders? Who are your decision makers? And what other aspects of the organization might you need to be successful, including things like InfoSec, training, the help desk, things like that. So that is where you put all that information in your project charter. Most of you in the audience are probably familiar with this. If you do a Google search of project charter, you'll get all kinds of different outlines. This happens to be an outline that we have here at my company, but not necessarily the only outline. And so we really try to push this across our organization, but it's not a requirement. Actually, none of these things in my organization are requirements. Which I guess if I ran things here at MITRE, which I don't, but if I were really in charge, I would make every project do one of these project charters. It's my favorite thing. I've probably written 50 of them over the years. And part of that is describing what your deliverables will be. And the value of putting your deliverables in this document is that later, when the project's done, you want to be able to say, check, 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 check. We delivered this, we delivered this, we delivered this, right? So let's be as clear as we can in the project charter. What are you delivering? It doesn't have to be a product. It could be a document. It could be recommendations. It could be a presentation. It could be research results. I mean, it could be you're building a house, or you're building an office building. There's all kinds of different deliverables that you could be identifying here in your project charter. But this is really where it all happens. And many times I've been dropped into a project and they don't have one of these, and I end up writing it after we're partway through the project. And you think, well, why would you bother doing that? That doesn't add any value to me as a project. I don't really need this. So why are you doing it? Because it helps guide my thinking and my approach. It helps to guide those key milestones. It helps to guide who are the stakeholders that I'm communicating with on a regular basis. And I think that sometimes that's very muddy and it gets lost in the details, because God knows we get into so many details on projects, and this really elevates your project, and it elevates your team into really understanding, why are we doing this? What's the value? What's the purpose? So anyway, I could go on and on about how important this project charter is. I'll move on to the next. Schedule and budget. This isn't anything that you don't know about. And there's so many ways to do a schedule and so many ways to run your budget information. We use a tool called Clarity, and we track our budgets there. You probably use another tool, maybe use Excel. I've for many years used Excel to track my budgets, and there's so many ways to do that. I certainly don't have to pontificate much about that. In many of the projects I get dropped into, there typically is a budget. It may not have been paid attention to in terms of who's spending on it and when are we going to incur additional costs during the year, things like that. But there typically is a budget, but there isn't always a schedule. Interestingly enough, some of these folks go off and get into the nitty gritty of a project, and they don't really bring their heads up to understand what's the end game and what are we driving towards. And so again, different types of schedules. There's a high level one that executives want to see, and then there's a detailed one that the team needs. And then I've been known to do a week by week schedule. So yeah, lots of ways to do schedules, and I'll just leave it at that. All right, so now we're moving. By the way, interrupt me at any time with any questions that you have. Feel free to type them in the chat if you're uncomfortable with that. I know that's a big audience here today, and so sometimes you're uncomfortable talking in a big audience. I get it. But if anyone has a question, I'm happy to be interrupted through this. And again, I want to remind you that this could potentially be a training, a high-level training, project management training for your teams. And so think about that as we're going through this, and see if you think it makes sense for your organization. All right, so the three areas that we'll be looking at here is this user story backlog or requirements definition. That's part of planning. Sprint planning, or planning, if you're not doing an agile approach, you could be doing your milestone planning, your phase planning. But again, at a high level, what are your what's your planning approach? And then scope management. How are you defining your scope, and how are you keeping that on track? So those are three areas we'll be talking about in the planning phase. And again, in terms of what else are you doing, you're not just spitting out artifacts, you're defining outcomes and value. You're defining the strategy for this project. Sometimes you think, oh, well, I'm only the project manager, so I shouldn't be thinking about strategy. But that is a key area. I hear about it more and more lately. In my organization, strategy is really important. What's your vision? So not just this year, but what's next year? What does next year bring? What's the year after that? Your stakeholder relationships. You're starting to work with stakeholders and understand their needs. You're managing scope creep, which is a problem for me. I definitely have a problem with that. In terms of I let the scope grow bigger than it should often, and then I get in schedule trouble and budget trouble as a result. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Evaluating options. So you're a decision maker, and you need to be involved in helping to evaluate those options and deciding how to put those on paper and put a plan in place for those. And so that's also a critical element at this phase of the game. You're defining processes for change management, risk management, decision management, action items, status reporting. So there's a lot going on. I guess I want to make it clear that as a project manager, I am pretty adamant with my team about wanting them to really run and drive the mission success of the project. And so therefore, I mentioned earlier, you become irreplaceable on the project. You're the one person that everyone goes to when there's a question or an issue or a risk item. And so this is where you're starting to build that confidence that the team will have in you. So the first element, artifact, I guess I have here is a work breakdown structure. Again, you could look at Google and find all kinds of different formats. This is one of the many formats that I have used that has been successful. And the nice part about this view is that it really does show you the whole activity broken down into smaller pieces on one page, which everyone loves. And you could stare at this for 10 minutes and get lots of details out of it and understanding out of it. And, you know, you could assign budget to each one of these boxes. You could assign a task leader to each one of these boxes, and breaking the system down into phases like that, into pieces like this, certainly makes things a little easier when it comes to your planning process and assigning tasks to individuals on the effort. And I think that this is another one of my favorite of these tools that we're presenting today. I mentioned earlier the project charter is a favorite of mine. This is also a favorite of mine. Not always necessarily in this picture view, but still very important to understand the pieces. The other thing that I like to do is assign a % complete to each one of these boxes. So how far along are we with, you know, device registration in this case? How far are we in terms of mobile device configuration? What are our % completes? And when you start to break it out like that, you can see you're spending more time in one area versus another for valid reasons, because it's a bigger fish to fry, if you will. But still, it's useful to see how far along you are in each one of these areas. And so I would encourage you to take a look at this template and maybe use it in your environment, see if it works for you. Sprint planning and planning your team. What are they doing on a day-to-day basis? And they're looking to you for the guidance. They're looking to you for leadership. They're looking to you to tell them what's important right now at this particular point in time, what is critical. So that what you're seeing here on the lower left is a task list, an assignment for each of those tasks, some dates that are associated with when those tasks should be completed, and then perhaps some notes for each one of these. So I think that this is a useful format for putting together some sort of a project plan. Now, this is not Microsoft Project, but it looks like Microsoft Project. And in fact, some of our team members love Microsoft Project and you prefer to use that. And this is actually an Excel version. Doesn't look like Excel, but it is. It's an Excel version of what you might get with Microsoft Project. But of course, Project tracks a lot more than this. So it's more of a simplified version of that. But, you know, use Excel, use Project, maybe you have some fancy project management tools like Monday or some of these other commercial products that are coming out now that have lots of these great capabilities. But make sure you're doing it and you're communicating it and tracking these efforts on a regular basis. I wanted to make a comment about the fact that where I work, we go along every day and maybe we're not paying a lot of attention to this. And then all of a sudden, my director comes along and says, where are you with this project? Or what's your status on these activities? Or how far, where's your task plan? I want to see it. And I want to see where you are on these things. And I'm always, I don't know why, I'm always surprised when I should know by now that they're looking for things like that. But I'm always surprised when they come up and ask for those things. So, and maybe this happens where you work too, that you go along and you don't think anyone really cares about a task plan. And then, you know, your manager comes and asks you for it and you don't have it and you're a little bit panicked. So it's always a good thing to have these things really helping you with your decision-making process and prioritization. And, you know, I think a lot of you have these things. You're probably sitting there saying, yeah, I do this. Oh, yeah, I know all about this. This isn't anything new. But sometimes it's always good to hear it again and to hear some of the challenges that you get if you don't do these kinds of things, if you're not on top of this on a regular basis. And I know in my case, most of my team members are working on other things. They're working on my project, but they're also on, you know, 3 or 4 other projects. And some of them get bumped up in priority over mine at certain times of the year, depending on what's going on. So I have to kind of get people's attention and get them to know that they're on the critical path, that they need to do this. And if they don't get it done, then they're delaying someone else behind them. So I use this tool often to help me with that. The other thing that's on this page is a RACI diagram. And again, many of you are familiar with this and probably think, yeah, I do something like this too. And I think this is a useful tool, especially as you're coming onto a project, whether it's in the early stages or even if it's later in the project. This is useful to clarify who's really responsible and who's just an advisor on a program. So you're really talking about, on this particular slide, you're tracking people, you're tracking your team, you're identifying who's a decision maker, and you're also assigning people work to do. And you know, the other thing that's challenging about that is I've been on projects where I'm in charge of, say, 20 people, but they don't all report to me in an HR fashion. In other words, I don't write their review. They're not in my department, but yet they look to me for direction, and I'm expected to deliver successfully on a project, and they are I'm relying on them to do what I'm asking them to do. And so that's always a challenge. I mean, I think in my early days of my career, that was a challenge to realize that I'm in that sort of position. I'm nowadays, it's not as much of it. My light just went off. I have to move a little bit, I guess. So anyways, I think that it has been, I have found that to be a challenge over the years, and not so much of a challenge anymore because it's institutionalized and it's well known, but maybe in your organization it's not. And so it makes things a little bit harder for you to run a project when people don't actually report to you and you don't actually decide how they allocate their time. So these kinds of tools help with making things clear to people. All right, the next slide here talks about a Kanban board. This is another choice. It's not always necessary, but we found that it's been useful in the work that we do in my organization. So for those of you who aren't unfamiliar with a Kanban board, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but basically we use a tool called Jira, but there are many other tools that do this kind of thing. You basically have a card for each activity and you assign a person to that activity, and then you put them in columns: to do, done, in progress, etc. And you can drag those cards into different columns as you proceed through the development process. And I think that there are teams that love this approach. I think Microsoft has a project planner that they use that looks a lot like this. And then there are other teams that don't use this at all, because I think the drawback is sometimes you can't see the whole schedule with using this. You just are really drilled into a certain point in time. And again, I think in combination, they work well together. So having an overall schedule and then having this drilled down Kanban board can be useful depending upon the team and depending upon the project. So again, you get dropped into a project and they're using a Kanban board, but they don't have a schedule, then you may need to go back and do the schedule, and vice versa. You get dropped into a project, they have a schedule, but they don't have this. That might be something that you could suggest. One thing that I would caution you on as fellow project managers is if you're just doing status reports all the time and collecting feedback from your team and then reporting out to stakeholders, that's really not driving the project. It definitely is part of your job, but it's not your only job. And I would caution you on that, because I've seen that be a problem over the years, where the importance of that particular person is not as significant as it would be if you're actually driving the mission and driving people to success. So people say to me, well, I came onto a project, I did all the planning, I put a schedule together and a budget, and I wrote a project charter, and now it's up to the team. They're executing it, and I don't have any say in the matter. They have to get it done, and I keep checking with them, and they keep telling me they haven't finished, so I guess I'm just waiting for them to get it finished. And so I feel like there's a piece missing there, right? So you're missing that execution, you're missing driving people and asking them and elbowing them and pressuring them, hey, where are you with this? I need this. We need to get this done. This is the critical path. And if you're not doing that, who is? No one else is. Maybe there's someone else that's doing it, but it should be you. What we do in my company is we often partner with the technical team. So it's easy to say, well, that person should be pushing the group to be successful, or the director should be pushing the group to be successful, or someone else should be pushing the group to be successful. But really, it's your job as the project manager. And so I think that that sometimes that can be forgotten about, that I'm scheduling the meetings and I'm taking notes and I'm reporting back on status, but I'm not really driving the project's mission. And I think that can be an easy trap to fall in. So make yourself absolutely irreplaceable and not irrelevant. Really, that's my message there. Okay, moving on. So documenting requirements, user stories, use cases. Different projects need different things. So the one project I'm on right now, use cases is the most important thing. So we have probably, 40 or 50 use cases on this particular project, and we're constantly tweaking them and fixing them and editing them, etc. So that's important to us. We don't have requirements, we have use cases. That's important to us. Other projects, they use an agile approach. User stories are very important to them, and they have epics and they have details around their user stories. And I've been on projects where that's important. And then I've been on other projects where they don't do anything like this. And then at some point they decide, we probably should write down our requirements. And so they do that either after the fact or as part of testing. And so again, different projects require different things. So I kind of grouped all these into one place to point out that the fact that you probably should write some of this down if you're being effective and you're being thorough and you're trying to be as clear as you can with these pieces. I will say that I've recently started using ChatGPT for some of this, and I've found how effective it can be at creating drafts of some of these things. So if you sit back and you say, well, we have a schedule, and we have a project charter, and we have a briefing, we have like 4 or 5 briefings that we put together. Well, why don't you feed all of that into ChatGPT and ask it to create some use cases for you or some requirements for you? You'd be interested, you'd be fascinated to see what comes out the other end of all of that. So I think that is a useful point to bring up. And
Hey, Donna.
question, John.
Yeah, there are a couple questions in the chat or conversations. Is this a good
Okay.
time to bring them up, or should I
Absolutely.
wait?
No,
So
I think it's great.
there was a question about, do you use AI tools to automate repetitive tasks or to make the reports?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I have another presentation on that, John. I can present another time
I would love to have you.
for you. Yeah.
Oh.
So the important thing about, so there's 2 things that I've found that are important about about using AI, ChatGPT, particularly in my case. That's what I tend to use. And the one thing, of course, is the prompting that you can put together. But the other thing is, the more information you can give ChatGPT on this, the better. I give you an example. I had a meeting at the end of the year last year where I had my team report on accomplishments, and I recorded the meeting, and I took the transcript and I fed it into ChatGPT, the whole transcript of the meeting. And then I just asked ChatGPT to summarize the accomplishments. And, it had some struggles, so I had to pick pieces out. I had to delete some things. Some of the language wasn't quite right in the transcript. So I had to play with it a little bit. And then when it gave me a result, I asked it to put it in a different format. So it did that. And then I asked it to be more brief because it was too long. I wanted it to be shorter. So it did that. So that's the other nice thing about, using ChatGPT for these kinds of things is that staying on that one page as you're in that same session, you can just keep asking, fix that. I don't like that. Try it again, or adjust it a little bit, and you're still talking about the same topic that's in your session. So anyway, I could go on and on about that. That's a great topic.
Great. Yeah, we might have to bring it, we'll have to bring it back for
Yes.
that topic. There was another comment on, I've personally seen different tools so far, including Excel, Jira, and Clarity. Do you know if there are any integrations among them? Are there examples? I think some people have said they've used Smart Sheets
Yeah.
as well
So
as Rocket Lane.
yeah, so I'm jealous of you people that have Smartsheet and Rocket Lane. I've seen some of these products at various conferences and they are so impressive. And I've gone back to my management and asked for the money to buy those things and I always get turned down. So I have to use the corporate tools, we pay money for Clarity, we pay money for some of these other things. And so we should be using these tools. So I would love to be able to say that I know about Smartsheet, but I don't. And I've seen it demoed though. It's a pretty impressive product. So good for you. There is some integration between Clarity and Excel, but not an awful lot. I'm able to download things from Clarity and reports and whatnot. So that does help. But I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, that was very helpful, and that's all of them right now. So
All right,
you can
great.
continue. Thank you.
Thanks. Keep interrupting me, John.
Okay.
Appreciate it. All right, and I'll keep going then. All right, so we're moving into execution. So we're talking about status reports here and metrics. And again, in this phase of the project, you're continuing to really drive the success and being a confident partner with your teammate, your technical team. I could tell you this morning I had a meeting with someone and came in my office and gave me the technical details of what's happening on one of my projects. And I shook my head, I put my hands in my head and my hands in my head in my hands. And I said, I don't understand what you're telling me. You need to really, that's very confusing to me. Can we walk through this again a little slower? And when you do that, they're very happy to do that for you. So it's not like, he's whizzing in and out and he's done and he says what he says and he moves on. He's very willing to try to help me understand it better. So that I think that's a really important job as a project manager. You sit there and you say, well, I'm working with all these labs, these lab doctors, and they're doing all of these medical assessments, and they're telling me what is, and I don't understand what they're saying. It's all confusing to me. But if you really sit back and you really try hard to understand, at least at some level, what it is they're trying to communicate with you, it goes a long way towards that camaraderie, that partnership, and that relationship that you're trying to build with your technical team. And it goes a long way towards them trusting you because you're much better at presenting to the directors or to the VPs or to the people that control the purse strings, if you will, than they would be, because they tend to get too far into the details. And if they were sitting right here next to me, I would say the same thing. It's not like I'm saying anything that they don't know. So I'm more of a, I guess, if you will, I'm more of a marketing person because I stand to, I'm the one that's going to show and demonstrate and do it. If there's any sort of a road show, I'm typically the person that does that because I know the most about the project, but not at the deep level that some of the others know it. So anyway, we're in execution. We're talking about status reports. We're partnering with the SMEs, as I just mentioned. We're trying to be as irreplaceable as we can. Yes, you have to do status reports, but that's not your only job. So try to put a time box around how much time you spend on it. And you're helping to guide the planning process. If you don't have a test team, you may end up doing the testing. So you need to write a test plan. Same with training. If you have to do training, it might be part of your job. If you have to write communications or at least help draft communications, then that's all part of your activities as well. So someone says, well, all I do is write status reports. What should I be doing instead? Well, these are all the things you should be doing instead. And the more you can contribute, the more you know about the project, the more knowledgeable you are, the more confident you become, and the more you're pointed to as the person who really knows all the answers. So I think it makes for a great package. And again, you probably know all this, but it's always good to hear it again from a different person, from a different person's perspective, to focus on the things that you should be focused on. So this is an example of many different types of status reports. that you could write. And again, just trying to provide you with a template, which is helpful. This is a template that is actually for a portfolio. So you can see there's a set of projects that could go up at the top. So you could list all your individual projects. And then within that portfolio, what are your key milestones? What are the key achievements that you've recently had? Your key, the key risks, outstanding issues that you're looking at, any decisions that you made, and next steps. And using the red, yellow, green always helps. I know I've heard people say that that's kind of out of vogue these days, but it's certainly not out of vogue where I am. We use the red, yellow, green a lot. At a glance, you can get a sense of how well things are going. People are always nervous to do anything less than green. So I've seen people who, you know, in the hallway, everyone says this project is a mess. And then when the person presents, oh, we're great, it's all good, we're green, everything is terrific. And meanwhile, I know that the people in the hallway are saying it's behind schedule and the vendor is not working out. And there are all these issues with the delivery. But because the project manager doesn't want to make anyone nervous, they make everything green. So, you know, you have to keep your eye out for that. I always say no surprises. And that doesn't mean I make everything yellow or red, but there's lots of caveats in all the conversations that happen around status reports. So, you know, you don't want to promise that you'll deliver too many of these. I think monthly is probably the right cadence. I've been on a project where we had to do this weekly and it seemed a little bit excessive. And I think so that's one point I would make. The other points I would make, any way you can automate this, please try your best. Some of these products that you mentioned, Smartsheet, et cetera, probably has automatic budget dollars that you can pull out of there, as well as some of these achievements and key deliverables, et cetera, that you might need to report out on. So any way to automate this is the best alternative. And yeah, I could talk a lot more about. I have a version of a status report that's basically a schedule with arrows all over it that says, here's where we're at, and we just finished this, and we're working on that, and here's the next thing. So there's so many different ways to do status reports. It does depend on your audience, the stakeholders, what their appetite is for how detailed it should be. But again, if you're thinking about this as being a minimum viable product, and you're thinking about this set of artifacts that I'm talking to you here today and your PM Playbook, this is the kind of information that should be in, you know, your status report. But again, modify it. And I'm sure you all have status reports, or you've seen status reports of all different shapes and sizes. So this is just one of many examples. Okay, the next slide is a very, very basic view of metrics. And we spend a lot of time on metrics in my organization for one reason or another. I think that in some cases we're really good at collecting metrics, and in other places we're really bad at collecting metrics, and in other places we're kind of halfway. And so where are we really good? Well, we're really, really good at the service desk, because we have a tool that tracks all of our tickets, and that tool is full of metrics, and pie charts and diagrams and all kinds of things. And I'm always so jealous when I see the leader of the service desk present on his metrics, because he does such a great job. So that we're really good at. There are other projects, like one of the projects I'm on right now. We don't have any metrics, and I think that's an issue. And I don't know that we'll solve it. It's hard to collect metrics on the project that I'm on. So we don't really report on any metrics at the moment anyway. No one has asked for them, so we're not volunteering, I guess I would say. And then there are projects where we've been in the middle, where we do have some amount of metrics, but we're not standardized across, so we can't compare apples to apples, right? So if we said, okay, on every project, we want to know, how long does it take to develop? How long did it take to develop this? What's the quality in terms of a rubric? How are you measuring quality? I don't know. But whatever that rubric is, and you give us a score, what's the quality? And then customer satisfaction. Are we tracking with our customers and asking them whether they like it or not, whether they use it or not, et cetera? Are we helping with turnaround time? Are we improving our customers' experience? Have we lowered costs in some way? Have we increased some features by adding this new capability? So if we had those kind of more standard metrics, we would be better at comparing A to B and understanding where the value lies in some of the upgrades and some of the projects that we build. So I think that this is an area, if I was looking at my scorecard, we're not really good at metrics. And I think personally, I'm not very good at collecting metrics either, or insisting that they be collected. And maybe in your organization, you're better at it than we are. But it definitely is something to pay attention to. And even at some level, if you're tracking some of these kinds of things, to really prove your value, what is the value you're bringing to the organization is often measured in metrics. Some people don't like to send out surveys, so maybe we leave that one out, but maybe some of the other ones we can say, if we ignore customer satisfaction just for a moment and we say, have we lowered costs? Have we increased functionality? Have we done this more quickly than we might have done it in the past because we used this tool or this agile process or this team or this particular resource? Have we been able to be more successful than we have been in the past? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to state those things when you're wrapping up your project and you're reporting on your successes? So I guess I'm saying a little bit about metrics. I wish I had more to say about metrics, but I think it's a critical piece of any project. And if you have any templates or anything like that you'd love to forward to me, I'd love to see them. All right, and risk register. So this is a big one when you talk about the maturity of your organization. And again, lots of ways to do this. This is just one way. I've seen in my organization, we've done this in many different ways to varying degrees of success. It all depends on, what our leadership is looking for. At one point, our leadership was asking for this to be reflected in a red, yellow, green kind of a heat map, if you will, where we were able to show where the organization as a whole was being in high risk or in low risk. And in this case, what you're looking at here is for a specific project, not for an organization, but for the specific project, what are the risks that we might likely run into as we go through this in this particular point in time. But suffice it to say, it's useful to have a risk register. And again, the manager comes along and says, what are the risks on this project? It would be good if you had some sort of a risk register so you could point right to that as you're tracking these kinds of things. And, some of the teams that I work with, they're very big Confluence fans. I don't know, again, another tool. Confluence is an Atlassian product that we have in my company. And there are some projects that just create a Confluence page for their project, and they've got links to the project charter, and here's the schedule, and here's the risk register, and here, and it doesn't have to be Confluence. It could be SharePoint, it could be Teams, it could be whatever tool you have, but everything is in one place, and you can get to all these artifacts, and it's a very useful thing to have, because sometimes tracking these things down can be harder than not having them at all. All right, so we're wrapping up here. I know I only have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get through the last two sections that I have. We're talking about, how satisfactory are you with respect to the deliverables that you've done at the end of your project? How are you communicating what you've completed? Again, that's a weak area for me. I don't think that we communicate as well as we should. Change management is also a critical component to that communication. So in addition to that, we're validating the project, we're announcing our successes, we're establishing any next phases. Many times we don't finish what we set out to do, and we hope that we'll get funding for a follow-up phase. Are there any road shows? Are we presenting this around to different groups of people, potential users? who's a spokesperson? Oftentimes it's me, but maybe it's not. In your case, it's someone else. How are you recognizing leadership, not just yourself, but also your directors, your VPs, your cognizant VPs? How are you passing that information along? And then, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of these artifacts come out of this process navigation. So you have a set of processes, and so you're in the initiation phase, and the result of that initiation phase is that project charter. And then the same thing, as you're executing, what is the outcome of that execution? Well, it's actually the product that you're building. So how are you rolling things out, and what's your governance approach to all that? So there's lots of things going on at the same time that you're doing these things. So I showed you these with the deliverables early on. The key fact that you want to make sure that you highlight is that you actually delivered on these deliverables. And so what was the date expected? What was the date that you delivered? How successful were you in completing these activities? And then in terms of communications, and how are you communicating that you've got this new product? You started out with, the current state, and you're migrating to a future state, and what are the improvements that you'll see, and how great is it, and what is the user group that you're targeting? Who is it that you're actually targeting that will get benefits out of your product, et cetera. So there's a whole set of communications. Usually you have a team that works on that, but they'll be looking to you for guidance in terms of scheduling. When did the communications go out? How often are we reporting on these things, et cetera. So there's a whole communications plan. And then the change management goes along with that. So you're scoping the change. You've got the vision for the change. You need to drive commitment across the organization. And I've had some difficulties with this over the years in establishing an approach for change management and getting buy-in from stakeholders across the organization. And then sustaining that change often is difficult. People say, well, I hated the previous product, but I hate the new product even more. So you're trying to make an impact and make an improvement. And you spent all this money and invested all this time and effort, and people still want what they had before, even though they complained about it when they had it. So it's always a challenge, to say the least. And again, often there's a change management czar, if you will, that is looking to you for guidance, is looking to you for scheduling. So that's you're also responsible for helping get that change management into place. All right, and then when you're closing your project, you've got a lessons learned activity and writing impact stories. What is the value that you brought to the organization as a result of all of your hard work? So you're wrapping up, you're defining the impact and the value, and you're validating the fact that you have been a trusted advisor and irreplaceable on the project. And your lessons learned could come in many forms. This is one of many versions of a lessons learned activity. We say, well, what were our positive things? What did we succeed at? And then the thorns are, well, what could we have done better? And then the buds in the middle are, well, what are the potential opportunities for going forward to improve some of those things? And, that sounds a lot like a SWOT diagram where you've got strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's another version of a format for a lessons learned activity. We have a document template that looks a lot like this, that has these kinds of words in it. What did you do well? Well, what did you do not so well? And what might you fix or recommend fixing going forward? So that's a lessons learned. Again, we don't do an awful lot of these. We used to do more, but I think with the onset of agile approaches, many of these projects do a retrospective at the end of every one of their sprints. So they actually feel like they're doing this exercise on more of a regular basis, and they don't feel they need to have one done at the end of the project. So we let that happen, and we don't force the issue. And then a lot of people think, well, what's the value? What are we getting out of this? Who's actually taking these recommendations? So people don't always see as much value coming out of this as they had hoped. The last thing I'll leave you with in terms of templates is a set of impact stories that can help you to communicate your successes. And simply we just say, well, what was the challenge? What was our solution? And then what was the outcome? And very briefly, written in English, couple of sentences, just to really give you a sense of what successes we've had. And so I think that's another document that can come in handy when it's your turn to wrap up a project. So this is my last slide, just key takeaways here from today, that scorecard that we mentioned earlier. What is your score in these various areas? And this is really for your personal information. Where are the gaps that you see in your, I mentioned as we were going through these, where I fall short. I think I mentioned in the metrics area specifically is one example of an area where I believe that I fall short in terms of my project management skills. But where do you fall short? And budgeting too, that's another one that I could use some help with. And I think there's probably a few here where you could use some help. And where are you strong? Let's focus on the strengths that you have and emphasize those as well. I've got some recommended reading here. That's actually a picture of my book, but also the Project Management Maturity Model. That's a great book as well. There's lots of documentation on project management maturity models. I would hope that you would consider to use this kind of an approach to help train some of your non-project managers in some of these skills. I know I've got several folks on the call from MITRE. Thanks again for joining today. And most of them are already project managers, but a couple of them are not. So I hope that you got something out of this as well. John, any more questions on the chat?
There was a question about actually the PMP certification, whether it's recommended to take it now and when early in one's career or later.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I get a lot of questions about the PMP certification, and you know, in our organization, it is not a requirement, but in many organizations it is. So I think that I could tell you that it's a tough test. I had to take it twice myself, even though I've been a project manager for many, many years. I thought I knew everything, but I didn't clearly, because I didn't pass it the first time. There's an expectation that the PMP has that you are the expert, that you don't run to your boss and ask your boss for questions, that you know all the answers. And the way they do things may not be exactly the way you do them in your organization. In other words, if I had a problem, typically I would go to my manager and ask my manager, and PMP doesn't like that. They want you to know how to solve a problem on your own without going to your manager. So that's an example of, that's a little different than the way my company works. And so that you need to learn what PMP expects in terms of process, in terms of, now they ask a question, for example, you're in this situation. What's the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? What's the third thing you do? What's the fourth thing you do? Like that's a set of 4 questions, right? If you get one of them wrong, you get them all wrong, probably. So now there's a certain flow of what they expect. It's certainly way more detailed than the kind of information I just passed along here. So I would recommend giving it a shot, and then see how you do. And there's always a chance to take it again. It is a 3 or 4 hour test, so it's a tough one. I guess I would pass that along as my experience. But so prepare for it as much as you can. I don't know if I answered that, but
I think you did. Yes,
that's my opinion.
It is 1 o'clock. There was one more question, but I don't think we can cover right now. It was talking about more about scope creep. Maybe that could be a topic for another
Yes.
presentation. But
Sounds good.
it is 1 o'clock. I want to thank Donna for presenting. I want to thank everyone for joining for today's session, and we will be back in May with the next one. Thank you, everybody,
right.
and have a great
Thanks,
day.
John.
You're welcome.
Bye, everyone.